Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast, the show that gives you, the founder, the product builder, practical strategies for scaling your product from people who are also actively building. Today, I'm joined by Calvin Chen. Calvin is the founder and CEO of Fetchr, a YC-backed personal shopping assistant that does the shopping for you. Calvin started his founder journey early by starting and selling his first startup for $9 million in high school. He then did a short stint in college at USC where he started another company and eventually dropped out to do YC in 2023. Calvin has been very open about his founder journey on X, and so I've been really looking forward to our chat today. Calvin, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm going to pull up a tweet here to start the conversation that I really liked when I saw it on Twitter. So I'm going to give it a quick read for those who may not be watching on the stream. And it says, yesterday I sat in on Lulu Messervey's YC talk on brand and comms and realized I've been on X for 2 years just tossing out random thoughts. I asked myself, what's actually interesting or useful to share? What message do I want people to take away? For me, it's simple. I want to share the real journey of building a startup with ambitions to be massive. Too many founders glamorize the 0 to 100 million ARR arc and skip the early wondering and the darkness years. I want to share that part, the lows, the tiny wins, the late night arguments, all of it. It'll be a fun way to document what's happening in my life, and hopefully other people can learn a thing or two as well. So that's sort of the basis of our conversation today. I'm really excited to chat about it. The first thing I think, from what I understand, your entrepreneurship journey started in high school where you had a $9 million acquisition as a teenager. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah. I think it sounds more glamorous than it really was. I was, in high school trying to make some money online when I discovered this thing called drop shipping. I came from like the sneaker reselling bot world in middle school. So it was like, okay, this is just the next evolution. I started doing it myself, was not very good, then became somewhat good. But I think the gold was this internal tool that we built that helped really us work with manufacturers in China and just have a streamlined order management without using kind of these middlemen services. So when other people caught wind that, hey, I could save some money and not use these middlemen services that charge a fee. I could pay a flat rate to these kids. People jumped at it, and we just slowly grew that over the next 2 years of high school. And eventually I realized this is not something that is super fulfilling, nor do I think it's something that I could build like a really big company on and, hypothetically change the world. And so I just realized, hey, like, let's take the cash and run and, free up my time to do something else.
It's interesting. You hear so many stories about founders who, or you also hear stories from investors about founders that the thing that they look for is people who had early success or were basically trying to make money online, in high school or even earlier in that potentially. So how did you find, in high school, how did you find someone to acquire your company? What was that like?
It was actually pretty easy. It was actually one of our customers. And so I think I had no idea what VC was. I had no idea what startups were. I took CS classes in middle school and high school, and so I could code a little bit. But frankly, like my friend who helped me build it was much, much better than me. And so, I think we got lucky and just kind of fell into this problem that like people really felt was painful and were willing to pay for. And eventually, as like we grew and they're like, hey, we actually need this to be a lot better, and we couldn't do that. They were just like, why don't we just bring it in house? And so, it's not some story of me being in the valley and understanding what was going on. I think we just like, hey, this is a great opportunity. Let's just jump at it.
And then from there, you graduate high school, you head to USC where you get the idea for Rent a Fit. Can you talk a little bit about the journey of launching Rent a Fit?
Yeah, I cringe every time I hear the name because I think every company I've started, I'm terrible with naming it. You'll see as we progress, but I think it was really this idea of like at the time, my roommate and I, we looked at a lot of the girls around us and we were like, hey, they're using this thing called Rent the Runway. And it's this company that's really cool where they can rent like kind of like luxury designer items for super cheap. And, I went to USC, I'm from LA. People like to wear nice stuff to look cool. We were like freshmen in college and we are like, well, why can't we do this? Like, why can't we rent a really cool shirt or like a really cool hoodie and look cool like everyone else? And so we're like, why don't we just start it? I think it was a great learning experience. We were like shipping and dry cleaning stuff out of our like tiny college like dorm room. And I think I realized over time that we were building a logistics business. And if you look at Rent the Runway, my impression is they're not doing the hottest, which it's just a hard business to do, low margin in the retail game. And so I think I sort of realized that and was like, all right, what do I want to do with my life? I think technology is always where I want to be, software, and we weren't really doing that.
So that's super interesting. Two things you've said so far are there's kind of a theme happening here, which is you kind of have this, not kind of, you have success, and then twice you're like, actually, I don't see this as a long term thing, even though you're successful. Most people will just double down on that little bit of success that they have. So you've mentioned it a couple of times, but can you elaborate on how do you get to the point to where you realize, hey, even though I have this success, it's not going to lead to the long-term success as you envision it?
Yeah, I think it really comes back to like what do I want, right? Like what do you want out of your life, quote unquote. For me, it's I'm lucky that my first company, set me up to take big swings at things. And I look up to founders like Brian Chesky and Bezos and these guys who, did something that really quote unquote changed the world, right? And they did it on a massive scale. And I think that's exciting. And that's what I want to do. And when you look at, early success, well, what does that really mean? You do a million ARR or you do two, maybe you even do 10. Can you get to a billion ARR, right? That's the goal. And if you can't get there, why spend more time doubling down when you know in your heart, like, hey, this thing is not going to get there. Um, and so I think, it comes from a little bit of the best founders that I understand, you know, and have read from. They're delusional in the sense that like they really think what they're doing can be massive, but they're also somewhat realistic. I think Bezos has a really good like I guess motto where he's like, you have to be truth seeker. You have to seek truth and be live in reality sometimes. And at moments in my life, it's just been, are these ideas really as big as I think they are?
Mm.
And the answer has always probably been like no. Um, and we'll see how that impacts my life moving forward. Where maybe I do cut myself off too short on some things, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, you know, you obviously surrounded yourself with people who can also give you advice and point you in the right direction. Uh, one question that I had is, how did you launch Renefit and get your first users? What was the strategy there? There's so many people that are building startups in college that are trying to figure out how to launch. So how did you launch it?
Yeah, it's funny because like we just like went around campus. Like we would just go around campus doing the most random stuff. Like a friend of mine was actually like trying to make it as an artist at the time out of USC, and he would have these stickers with QR codes on them, and he would put them around everywhere. And he actually went pretty big, and I think now he's like a huge artist. And we just kind of were like, that's an interesting strategy. Why don't we do that, right? So like
Hmm.
we would have QR codes and pass them around. Like we go to Fairfax and put them on like stores and stuff. We do like giveaways. We'd like throw parties just like you had
Wow.
to like use it. We would do anything really just to get one user. Um, it was kind of like the YC do things that don't scale before I even knew what that was.
Hmm. Was there a thing? Was there an activation that you were like, oh man, that was the moment when you really hit exponential growth, at least exponential growth as a startup in college?
Think of it as like not really. It's just like doing a bunch of random things and slowly
Hmm.
numbers. And then you realize like there are fires like a bajillion times, right? It's like, oh, we actually have to like ship these out and we got to like
Right.
make sure they're clean, right? And like, oh no, there's a hole in something. Like who pays for that? And so like all these little things just slowly kind of creep up on you, especially as you're growing, and you have to figure out. Credit to my co-founder, Brendan at the time. He really helped me in kind of just like figuring this stuff out.
And did I read it correctly that you even used your own clothes at
Yeah.
times?
In the beginning, we had no money, no inventory, and so what did we do? We just like used my own clothes, my closet and his closet,
That's
and like
awesome.
bootstrap that. Yeah.
Yeah, that literally boots. If you start with boots, then that is the literal form of bootstrapping. And then I also read, you decided to raise a pre-seed in college. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's funny because like, you'd imagine I started a B2B SaaS company in high school that did well. And the here I am, quote unquote second time founder. I don't consider myself that, but uh I didn't really know what VC was. Like
Hmm.
I didn't really, USC doesn't have like a strong, it's not Stanford where you walk around and VCs are like, oh, let me give you money. And so what did we do? We went to like friends' parents and we went around trying to go to like friends and family and just trying to raise like money there. And we ended up putting a round together and it was like not something crazy, but it allowed us to get started. And that was really like my first experience like raising money, um, which was interesting.
Was it? Were you using the money to just buy inventory essentially?
Pretty much like buy inventory and then like, do some basic marketing, but that was pretty much what we used it for.
It's super interesting. I think there's so many students that the narrative these days is to, um, you know, the narrative these days is to try to raise as much money as you can. There's so many college students that glamorize raising money, and I think your story is interesting because you weren't necessarily trying to raise money for the status symbol of raising money. You were just raising money simply because you needed it to keep the business going and move it forward, which I think is really unique.
Yeah, I think it was like it wasn't even on purpose. Like I'm sure I probably would have loved more money at the time. Like
Sure.
if I don't know, one of these large firms came knocking at my door saying, "Hey, we're going to give you like a $5 million seed round," I probably
Hmm.
would have taken it. Looking back, I think it was great because, I think as you said, raising money is glamorized, but it shouldn't be, right? Even today, the business that me and my co-founder are working on, you know, he was an early engineer at Cursor,
Hmm.
and background wise, great, but like we haven't raised that much money because we don't need it yet,
Hmm.
right? So I think that's a great mentality to have.
Yeah. Can you actually elaborate on that a little bit? This idea of, I guess, what has that unlocked for you as a within your current venture? I know we're skipping ahead a little bit, but what has not raising money or making the conscious decision to not raise money in your current venture unlocked for you as a founder?
Yeah, I remember there was time when like early Fetchr was growing, and I was debating like, hey, should we go take more money? And an angel investor of mine, and also like a YC partner. Well, actually, pretty much all of my investors were like, hey, if you could just bottle up the energy of what it feels like when you have like 10 months of runway left and you have to figure it out, if you could bottle that energy up and just like use that for like your whole company, you would win like 100 times faster.
Hmm.
And I think it makes sense, right? Like, when you have more money in the bank, you feel more comfortable making decisions. Like you're not as scrappy and hungry as maybe you are. And I think that's fine if you're a Series B or Series C company, right? Because like you're scaling, you know what you're doing. But when you're early, like we still are making many decisions on what we have to do. And if we had, a couple million, 5, 6, $10 million in the bank, we would be making different decisions. And I'm not sure that that would benefit us.
Sure. And then what advice do you have for students who are doing school and yet also trying to balance starting a company at the same time?
I'm like the last person you should ask because I think I mean, I never went to class. You can ask, my roommates. I would like, stay up all night doing random stuff and, sleep during the day. And, I had a 2.6 GPA my freshman year, and my parents were incredibly pissed. Um, but, I think of it as I've always come out of the point of view is like school is not very hard.
Hmm.
If you just go to class and you like do the minimum amount of work, you can keep up, your school work and spend the other, 80% of your time doing interesting things, whether that's like reading, writing, building, whatever it is. I think that that's probably the best use of your time.
Yeah, the lesson I hear in there for students or even just founders in general who, you know, are trying to manage something else that could be a job, that could be school, whatever it may be, is this concept of ruthless prioritization. So, you know what you need to get done in your other venture, as in like sort of the constant thing, whether it be school or your 9 to 5. Know what you need to do there to excel, but meet that and then use the rest of your energy to do the other things that you want to work on. But you can only do that by ruthlessly prioritizing.
Yeah, I would say it another way, which is like agency, right? I think
Mm,
that word is thrown around on Twitter quite a bit, but I think there's a reason for it, which is, you kind of are either someone who's gonna like go do it or you're not. And so the idea is like, lots of people are busy, lots of successful people, not just founders, come from like different backgrounds, different, stuff in their life where they have to manage time. Like if you look at the common trade, it's probably like they were just high agency, like they just got it done. And
sure.
so that's kind of what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so you ultimately shut down Renefit during COVID with 3,000 paying users, $20,000 in MRR, which, to be fair, most people would boast about on Twitter these days. What was the kind of key decision for shutting it down? I think you touched on it a little bit, but if you just hit on that one more time, what was the key decision to shut down Renefit?
I think it was a couple things like, my co-founder and I were in college and we were like, do we really want to do this for the, foreseeable future? Like maybe we just want to get a job and like, is this really the thing that we thought it was going to be? I remember like early days, you're delusional and you're on the whiteboard. Like if we just get a million users, we're going to make 100 million or whatever the number was. And I remember on the whiteboard, we had those numbers. And, when the numbers don't get, when you look at your numbers and you're like, this isn't that realistic anymore, reality kind of hits and you're like, do you actually want to do this and do you not? And I think the real answer was like, we just didn't. Like, we weren't in it. Like, it was not the type of business that I could see myself building for 20 plus years.
Hmm.
Um, and I think same goes for him. And so we decided just like shut it down, return the capital and call it a day and move on.
Yeah. You know, I think that's an important concept there, which is knowing what you want to build for the next 10 to 20 years. If your ambitions are to truly build a great company, you're going to be building it for 10 to 20 potentially plus years. And if you're not passionate about it, you're going to burn out pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
So you shut down Renefit, then you do a short stint in investment banking before applying and ultimately being accepted into Y-Combinator. Can you walk us through that and your thought process in leaving school and turning down an investment banking career to join YC?
Yeah. So I think it was after Renefit, basically everyone in my life was like, all right, company stuff is cool. Go get a real job.
Right.
Yeah, my parents are pretty traditional. They immigrated from China, you know, education, kind of like a standard climb the corporate ladder route was very, just safe. And so they're like, why don't you just give it a shot? I think they weren't like against on like starting a company, but they were like, you need to try this out. And so I was like, okay, cool. You know, my my girlfriend at the time was also in investment banking. Her older sister was in finance. And I was like, this seems interesting. Like learning about how numbers work at like a larger company makes sense. And so, the delusion in me was like, oh, my like 2.7 GPA, I'm going to go to Goldman and I'm going to go to their best group in New York. And so I would just, wake up and I would wake up at like 5 a.m., cold email like these bankers and hop on a phone with them and be like, hey, like, here's my story. How do I get an internship? And I remember doing like 300 to 400 calls in that semester.
Wow.
Because I knew like, hey, if I got an interview, I think I could do it. It was just, can I get the interview with this
Sure.
shitty BA? And so eventually got it, went to Goldman, had a great summer actually. I weirdly enough, like kind of enjoyed it. It's the only place like where you work till 3 a.m. and it's like expected and people are like, that type of environment is somewhat exciting where it's like, oh no, we are just better than everyone else and like we are just going to outwork everyone else. Um, I think of it as like, but I looked back on it and I said, the people are amazing. The stuff that I'm doing, not so much.
Hmm.
I feel like I'm not really making an impact. Like tomorrow I could die and, someone else named Kevin would slot in and do the same job just as well. And so like, do I really want to be here? And I went back to school and was like, I want to build. Like
Hmm.
I'm pretty certain I want to build. This is also, when ChatGPT came out kind of in that December time, and I came together with Calix, who's like a friend of mine from USC. He also had built stuff in high school, and him and I were just like, AI, like
Hmm.
incredible. Don't know what's going to happen here, but something is going to happen. And so we threw in a late app to YC, and that was kind of the start of it.
Wow. I think YC applications just closed. So if you're listening to this and you're waiting for your response and you threw in that flyer application, it could hit for you. There you go. I read that the partners didn't actually like the idea you applied with, but believed in you as a founder. What do you think it was that drove that belief?
I actually asked them, like I remember briefly asking Gustav, who was my founder, I mean my partner and David Lieb, and I asked them like, why did you pick us? Like we were super late. Batch was like pretty much already started. You didn't really like our idea that much. And I think the partners are really, really good at kind of making bets on people.
Mm.
And I think they were like, it might not be now, it might be later, but like you guys have a chance, right? You guys are non-zero chance of doing something big, as long as you guys figure it out. I'm paraphrasing, these aren't their
Sure.
exact words. I think they said something along the lines of like, you guys have built stuff before and you guys communicated clearly. But I think it was really just like, they were like, why not? Like, this is a good bet to make.
Sure.
And yeah, I think that was kind of it.
Do you have any tips for people that are applying to YC? Like I said, I know the applications I believe just closed for the next batch, but if someone's listening to this and they're planning to apply for the following batch, what tips would you have for them?
Look, I'm not a YC partner, so I don't know. My guess is that YC invests in people, right? They invest in the actual founders,
Hmm.
not as much your idea. And so, you know, you can index on doing things to try to get it into YC, or you can index on just being a better founder. Right?
Hmm.
What does that mean? It means the classic stuff. Like, you know, YC posts videos for a reason. Those videos are like what they tell us in the batch. It's not like some super secret information that is going to get you to win. Like there are times when you ask a partner a question, and they're like, "Oh, have you seen my video on it?" Um, and it's the classic stuff. Like talk to users, launch, and like
Hmm.
build, ship quickly, and just like iterate insanely fast. And I think if you're a founder that does that, all you got to do is just showcase that that's you, right? If you're not, the better question isn't how do I get into YC? It's how do I become a better founder?
Hmm. Yeah, there's so many resources out there. As you said, the YC YouTube channel is a great place to start. Hopefully, Growth Goals is another great place to start. But I think what a lot of people lack is just simply the motivation and maybe the courage to actually get out there and apply the things that these people are telling you. Um, and so, you know, you're, obviously a prime example of that. Um, and then just look at all the founders that have come before you as well and come through YC. Almost all of them, in most cases, embody that specifically. Um, can you tell us about the YC experience? I know it almost seems like there's this, we'll call it an orange curtain, that like, and you've peeled back the curtain a bit with that last answer. But can you tell us about the YC experience? What's it like? What did you enjoy? Maybe what did you not like as much?
Yeah, I think for me, I went into it being like, oh my God, this is the mecca of startups, right? This is like where some of the greatest startups were born. And I really expected it to be more like school.
Hmm.
I think I was surprised when it was more, hey, like, here's some general guidance. Go do the thing.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think that's on purpose. You can't teach this stuff, right? Like the best founders know that you need to talk to users and you need to ship and you need to solve a real problem. And the best founders still mess up, right? The best founders still make mistakes in that area. And so I think of it as like YC is a great place to learn what is kind of like table stakes. And they teach you, I think the most important takeaways I had were you're a kid fresh out of like fresh out of college, just dropped out, and you sit down and you listen to Brent Chesky speak, and you're like, and maybe you get the chance to meet him, and you're kind of like, he is. You thought of him as a demigod. You're like, this guy is non-human, and you realize he is human, right?
Hmm.
He's someone who put things together and like made it work over a long period of time, and that if you have belief in yourself, you can do it too. I think that was one of my biggest takeaways is like, I should believe in myself. I can do this.
Hmm.
And when you actually believe that, why would you not? Um, I think the second takeaway is the speed, right? You start to see like the best founders, like how fast do they move and at what intensity do they move? Uh, and you see that and it's hard to unsee, right?
Hmm.
You think like something takes a month or 2 months and they do it in a day, that's a very different level of speed and intensity than like anything else. And so you start to index like if those are the people that I'm competing against, I have to move at that speed too. Um, yeah, I mean that's kind of what I would say about the experience.
What do you think? So the speed one is interesting. What do you think is the biggest enabler of the speed? And what I mean by that is, you said what might take someone a month, someone at YC is doing in a day. What is the thing that enables them to move that quickly?
I think raw ability is table stakes.
Hmm.
Like the answer might honestly just be they are just better, right? They're a better engineer, they're a better
Sure.
designer, they're better at sales. Um, I think it comes down to also just like how much they care and push, right? Like, there are 24 hours in a day. You know, how many of those are you working truly focused, right? And dedicated? Those are the things I kind of say. I think also just like it's kind of the belief of like there's like a standard of what gets done, right? So I'm sure if you work at like a big tech company, they're like, oh, it takes about a month to do this thing. And like in reality, it doesn't take a month. It might take a day, right? And it's just like knowing like when can you push and where do you push. And then I'd also say just clarity. Like when you have focus and clarity in what you should do, you are able to move much faster.
Got it. And then are you all like practically speaking, you because you joined YC with a co-founder. So are you guys working like are you working at the YC offices? Are you working from your apartment? Where are you actually doing the work? And then obviously I know there's events and whatnot that go along with it.
Yeah, I mean, we're working on a WeWork 90% of the time,
Hmm.
or like in our apartment, right? And so I think YC says this thing, which is they really don't believe in co-working. And, it comes maybe from the Peter Thiel lineage of like Keith Roy also says co-working is not for startups. And,
Hmm.
the idea is that the average startup fails, the average YC startup fails, right? And so if you're co-working with everyone, you're going to muddle your culture and muddle your, intensity and speed to the average startup and even the average YC startup. And so the idea is, hey, you kind of really want to set your own pace and really be truly exceptional.
And then final question on YC is, you know, what are some of the things that YC is not?
I think of it as like YC is not like it goes back to my statement earlier, which is like YC is not school, right? Like you don't come and it's not like you just take your classes and get a good grade and like you
Hmm.
win. Like I would say, I don't know what the stats are, but like, YC's an investor. Like these companies, a lot of them are going to fail. And so you want to win, right? And what does that mean? It's not just being, not just getting an A and calling it a day. It's no, you have to be the last one standing. Like you
Mm.
got to truly beat everyone else. And so I think of it as like I thought, I was under the opinion that like, oh, I go to YC and I'm going to be a billionaire. It's like that's so just not the case.
Mm.
It's you really got to, YC teaches you a lot of really fundamental learnings, but it's still up to you. Like you have to just be better. You got to be exceptional. And like, when I went through YC, I wasn't. Like we were just like two random kids. We didn't know what we were doing.
Mm. I think that's a great segue. So you complete YC without an idea, which I'd like you to talk a little bit about that in a moment. So you complete YC without an idea. Your co-founder leaves to go back to school. Can you talk about that experience, sort of pivoting around to try to find that idea during YC, and then ultimately how you landed on your startup Kopia?
We worked on everything that we could imagine, right? So like we started off as a customer analytics platform, or like there's something there. Maybe it's like customer research, maybe there's something there. And then we pivoted around to like wealth management. Like maybe companies want to better understand their cash and their burn and their runway. Like we had that problem when we were two high school kids trying to run our companies. We had no idea how to do finance, right? Maybe we want to do like something for bankers. Maybe we want to do something for students. Like we really did brainstorm across the gambit. And I think it came down to we had no conviction in anything. Like we just didn't care. We didn't really believe in anything. And so I think what that meant was, Calix was like, hey, I don't know if I don't know if I'm ready to be a founder because I just don't believe in anything. And so
Mm.
he went back to school and I was then forced to make a decision of like, what do I do? Right? Do I continue to build or do I go back to school too and finish and go to Goldman and call it a day? And I think in my heart, I think truthfully it was a hard decision. In my heart, I knew what I wanted. I knew I wanted to build. So that's kind of just what I ended up choosing. And how did I land on Kobe? I think I just went back to what I knew. Like, I think we had the opportunity to sit down with Paul Graham,
Mm.
and PG really has impacted my life in the short amount of time that I've spent with him, in the sense that I think he gives you permission almost to go do something like that. It's just like go follow your interests. Don't care about what is a good startup. Don't care what is a good business. Like go follow what you're like curious about and what
Mm.
you're interested in. And I just kept coming back to the area of shopping. Maybe it's because it's what I knew, maybe because it's like my background, but I kept coming back. It's like there's something here. Like there is just something fundamentally wrong with how we shop online today. And it's just like I kept coming back to this area. And so I started just building a bunch of random stuff I was interested in. And then landed on Kopia because I think diffusion models are interesting. And, it's a bit of a tar pit idea. PG even told me like this is a tar pit idea where it's try things on virtually. Um, I think that I really just believe that like diffusion models would change the whole landscape and kind of worked on it for a couple months.
And is so you sat, I guess logistically, how did that work? As in, you finish YC, did you just use some of the initial funding you had from YC and just like use that as the additional runway you had? How did that work?
I think I will always be grateful to YC and my partners Gustav and Dave because when Calix left, they could have easily said like, "Hey, you know, you should call it a day, go back to the drawing board, but like, why don't you return the capital and like
Mm.
apply again?" And instead, they really just said, "Hey, like, if you want to do this, I don't think they were ever like, we believe in you and you got this." It was more just like, we'll let you keep going. Like, if that's what you want to do, like, we'll let you do it. And I will always be grateful to that. So what I did was, yeah, I kept running off the YC capital and, till this day, we're still a YC company. And so, yeah,
And then you start Copia, you start out B2C, and then eventually pivot. within that to go B2B, how did you know it was time to pivot? And what were some of the indicators that led you to think that, hey, it's time to pivot?
I think it was just like, okay, this is interesting. That we launched the B2C thing, got like people on it and they were using it. But it was like, okay, well, how do you actually build like a business off of this? Like you need to build the next generation marketplace, right? Like the place that everyone goes to go shop. And I found it hard to believe that like if you just had a regular platform with just virtual try on, that that was going to be the place where like everyone went to go shop. I could be wrong. And so the idea was then like, okay, well, it makes sense. Like we were getting, we were posting stuff online and all these brands are hitting us up being like, hey, we want to use this. We want to use this.
Hmm.
And so we're like, okay, we're going to go sell the brands. But what we're going to do is like this cool thing was like a widget on the brand site, but you have to sign up with like a Kopia account. And so like, let's say we integrate on Zara, we're going to get like millions of users just through Zara. And then they can take their account across all these different brands. So like then if you go to H&M, you have the same account, you could just use it there. And then we're like, eventually what we'll do is pull everyone back to this like marketplace. It was just like this grand scheme that we had in our heads that is totally just like wrong. Um, Turns out, I just think fundamentally, virtual trying is like a cool feature. I'm not certain that it's like the thing that like everyone can build, like you're going to build a generational company on. And I could be wrong on this. Like Doji, for example, is doing that today, and I think they're doing a killer job. And the founders, you know, seem to be on the right track there, and they have a great team. Um, but I don't know. I think I'm not super convinced, and so we decided to just I think eventually what I decided was like, hey, even though we're working with some brands, again, it's like, do I want to sink 3 years into this? I'm not certain.
Yeah. And you had, I read it in I think your Substack article that you wrote, which you said something along the lines of, what I advise friends who are pivoting is to pick something that you're interested in and build it out, even if it is a dumb idea. So can you talk a little bit about some of your learnings that you had during your pivoting and how you're going to land on ultimately the next thing?
Yeah, I think two things. When you're pivoting across markets and problem spaces, your learnings don't compound, right? So like every user you talk to is kind of sort of like a waste because you're just kind of throwing them away and moving on to a different problem. I think when I started to really kind of hone in on like consumer shopping for clothes, like my learnings started to compound. Like what do
Mm,
people actually care about, right? And so now my learnings are like a year and a half in across all my different products, and I feel like I have a good grasp. Like, well, what do people actually want? Um, and so that's what I would say. Why I say like, hey, building out a dumb idea, even if like as long as you're interested in it, could help you uncover insights as to like what the next thing is or what the pivot is. Um, I think where I see a lot of people struggle and like we struggle too is like spending a week here, 2 weeks here, 3 weeks here. You don't have conviction in anything, and which what that means is like you're very shallow.
mm,
You don't uncover any deep insights. And like where are the best companies built? They're covered in like deeper problems that like weren't necessarily addressed in other things, right? And so that's what I think is that's why I say go build this thing even if it's stupid. Maybe you'll learn something.
sure. It's a really interesting point because especially with indie hackers today, you see so many indie hackers that are like, I'm going to build something, I'm going to launch it. If it doesn't get traction in 2 weeks, I'm done. I'm moving on to the next thing. That's kind of the general sentiment on Twitter. And to your point, if you do that, you never actually give the thing a chance. Where who knows, maybe there is something in the thing. If there's not something in the thing, if you give it time, you may discover something new within the thing. And so, I actually pulled a quote as well from that same Substack article on compounding effects, which I'll read here because I thought it was really good. It says, I've come to believe, you wrote that I've come to believe that most of creating something of value is just staying in the game long enough to take advantage of the compounding effects of continuously taking action. How did that mindset ultimately lead you to create Fetchr?
I think of it as I think startups are one over a long period of time of compound learning and growth, right? I think the other thing is to learn, you have to keep doing things, right? You have to experiment, you have to run experiments, you have to take action to then learn from those actions and decisions. And so, I think Kopia came out of like going back to first principles of like, okay, now I've done all this stuff in this space. What do I think people actually care about? Like if you reflect. And it was kind of just like, well, people want clothes that look good on them in their general preferences of style and budget, right? And particular size and fit is also important. And so, do I want to try it on virtually, or do I want to like browse, or do I want to chat with an AI, or like no, like I want the thing, right? And so, that's really what it came down to. Is like, hey, if we build something that just helps people get the things that they're already looking for with less friction and easier, great.
And then how did you get from Copia to Fetchr? What was that journey like?
It was actually, it was mentally tough, but like logistically pretty easy. It was, hey, I decided, okay, we're not going to work on this anymore. Um, you know, Founding team split up, and like just, it was like pretty much just me. We, then kind of like told existing customers like, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. And I emailed my investors being like, hey, I think I chatted with my investors before of like, hey, I think I'm going to pivot here. And then I basically, is that okay? And then I basically sent an email saying, hey, like, we're moving on. Like, we're going to explore this other idea. Um, and I really came out of like Copia being like, you know what, I'm going to take more time exploring the actual problem and product.
Hmm.
Like, let me do things really manually. So what I actually do is just spend time like manually shopping for people.
Hmm.
No product, like very, very simple product, if anything, was just like a front end. Uh, and just like manually doing stuff for people to see if anybody wanted this service.
Hmm. You've talked a little bit about co-founders, and it sounds like you've done a really good job of sort of, you know, figuring out when it's time to sort of split from working with the co-founder you're working with. Can you share any learnings that you have from what, whether it be finding a co-founder, what you should be looking for in a co-founder, or another thing would be, when do you know that it's time to split from a co-founder?
Yeah, it's interesting because like after Copia, I was actually dead set on being solo.
Hmm.
I was like, I don't want to deal with the co-founder anymore. Like I just kind of want to, like I have conviction in this and I'm going to build it and I'm going to hire a team around me. Um, I think what I realized, what I really wanted to say was like, I want to have someone who I know is going to be here when times get tough and like is committed to building something really big. Right? I think that was like my biggest learning was you have to be aligned with the general want. Right? Some people want to start companies because they want to feel cool and like raise money. Some
Hmm.
people want to start companies because they want to make money and they'll jump at $100 million exit. Some people want to start companies to truly change the world. Some people just want to build the thing that they're interested in. So it's about like, okay, if you're going to partner with somebody, and for me, I knew what I wanted. I wanted to build a long-term really big company, right? And so like if I were to partner with someone, I wanted to make sure that I was aligned with them on that. That was like my biggest learning. I think the other thing is, picking someone to work with for the next 10 years is like not a light decision, and you just don't have that much information to work on,
Hmm.
which is why most people would say like, oh, let's work with your childhood best friend or your brother or whoever it may be, because you have more data points. I think when you're working with someone new, you don't really know. I think the thing that I feel really lucky about is my current co-founder, Naveed. Him and I are extremely brutally honest with each other.
Hmm.
I think it's sort of this idea of like we can share almost anything. We can share our thoughts, we can share feedback, and like we fight, we argue, but we always come out of those situations being like pretty happy, like pretty glad that we have that relationship. And I think it just builds trust. And so like on co-founder, I think it's really that like align on your long-term wants. What do you want out of this thing? How long do you want to really work on this for? And have a really kind of like real relationship, right? Like fight, argue, be honest. And I think like those two things are kind of like pillars of what you want. I think skill sets, even like you could hire for skill sets.
Hmm.
I think you need to have those two things. Everything else is a cherry on top.
Sure. Yeah, someone that you someone that you trust, that you trust their opinion. If you are waffling on a decision, someone that you can go to, know that they're going to give you good advice, or at least what they perceive as good advice, and it's advice that you respect. Um, I know that's massive in building a company with the co-founder. You've created more than once at this point. You've created companies with thousands of users. What are some of the practical strategies you've used to acquire users at each of your companies, whether it's Kopia, Fetchr, even Renefit?
I think it kind of goes back to YC principle of just like do things that don't scale, right? Like if you're building something and you don't know where to get your first customer, why are you building it,
Hmm.
right? Your first customer should probably be you, right? Or you know who your first customer is. If you don't, you shouldn't be building anything because like you should be understanding, hey, who am I building for? Um, that I think goes back to that. And then I think it's like, hey, if you know who you're building for, whether it's yourself, go find more people like you, right? Or it's for like this very niche person solving their problem. How did you find them? How did you discover the problem? Go find more people like that, right? I really believe in this idea of go find just like 10 and eventually 100 people who love what you're doing. Like
Hmm.
they actually love what you're doing and they'd be really disappointed if you didn't exist. And they will tell you how to find more people like them, right? I think people overcomplicate kind of like growth and this idea of like, I need to go get 10,000 users onto my thing. That's great. But like, it's much cooler to have 100 people who really, really love you. And I think that advice goes for people who are trying to build like great products. I think I see the indie hacker world and like a lot of consumer apps these days are kind of like these very low, very simple products that just do really, really well on marketing. I think that's somewhat of a different approach.
Hmm.
Like, people have this problem and you're just going to be really good at marketing. But when you build great product, I think that's the different kind of like, how do you start? How do you start thinking about what do I begin?
Yeah. Yeah, and even to the marketing, call it paid marketing or influencer marketing approach that these consumer apps are taking to growth, you know, they've found sort of hacky ways to identify people that would want their product. The whole formula of you start a new TikTok account, you only follow people within the domain that your product is within, and then you sort of find out the content that they're creating, you find out the creators in that domain. But even those people, to your point, are identifying, hey, who are the people that need the thing? They know what the thing is, and then they've just found a way to get it at scale. Do you think it's possible for someone to start a company that that the product isn't for them?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you look at a lot of B2B companies, like a lot of founders are just discovered a problem that like they don't necessarily care about or like not care but like they don't use, they're not a user, they're not a consumer of it, but they really understand that problem and they go fix it and it's a painful problem, right? um I think there's more than enough cases where that happens. I think the counter argument to that is 90% of the time, founders who are not building for themselves are probably kidding to themselves that like this is the thing that they want to work on and that like this is the thing they understand. I think the exceptional founders who make it are the ones who aren't building for themselves and are truly honest that like, hey, somebody actually does want this. I think the more common example is like, oh no, I know they want it, but they don't want it.
Hmm. And you do have to sort of, if your motivations are not because you love the product or because you love the problem, if you have other motivations for pursuing the solution to the problem that you found, you've got to search yourself and decide if that's the thing that you want to do for 10 years, like you said earlier. If it's not, it might work for a year or two, but even when you're successful, you're probably going to be pretty empty because you're just not doing something that you want to do.
it sort of goes back to like what are your motivations? And like some people's motivations is like they just want to build a big company, they don't care what it is, and they want to make money.
Hmm.
Like that actually, like when you say it like that, it's like, oh, like you know, they're not going to make it. But actually, the data says like it doesn't matter. Like your motivations can be whatever, right? It's just like, okay, great. What does that mean? You still got to do the same thing. You still got to understand someone's problem. Got to identify a problem that's painful and people are willing to pay for, and you need to build a great product to solve it, right? And so if you can do those things and your motivation is just like I want to make a bunch of money, it actually doesn't matter. Like go do it. Um, I think it just comes back to like most people kid themselves of like, oh, I want to make, you know, their motivations are, you know, everyone wants to make a lot of money, but they don't actually want to work that hard for it. They don't want to like put in the sacrifice. They don't want to like go talk to their users. They don't like they want to sit back and make money and like they think it's lovely, but like that's not how it's done.
Sure. Yeah. And I want to pivot to specific to talk about focus. So I'm going to pull up a tweet that you had, Calvin, about focus. I thought it was great. So it says, "Focus is what separates winners and losers in startups. Too many people try to do multiple things at once. When trying to do the impossible, you can't do anything but dedicate everything to getting it right." Can you elaborate that on a little bit more? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think it came from like multiple angles, right? Like I think there's a lot of founders who even have some level of success and they start doing a lot of different things, right? So like, you know, I think of that as they start angel investing and they start um, you know, like not being as dedicated to their company. Like maybe they're doing side projects, maybe we're doing all this kind of like you know more random things. And I think that's when you start to see like, hey, it's the people that are just like ruthlessly dedicated and focused on this one thing for a very long time that win. And you know, I'm not the best at it. I think it's something that I noticed and I was like, hey, I actually want to be better at focusing and like prioritizing my time and focusing on one thing. Like I think transparently, like it's not something that I did very well. It's something that I want to get better at. But I think when you notice, like, hey, well, if you look at who are the people that have won, they're really good at it, right? They prioritize their minutes in their day. And so I think it was just clear to me that, hey, you know, you really want to just start focusing on like what's important and like sacrifice almost everything else in your life to do that one thing.
Sure. Speaking of prioritization, I saw that you recently are beginning to prioritize TikTok as a growth channel. Can you talk about what you've learned on that platform so far?
Not much because I suck at it. But, you know, I think distribution is incredibly important, especially in a consumer product. You know, we're in the early stages of like product is somewhat working and we
Hmm.
want to start growing it. And, you know, for us, what does that look like? I think it's TikTok, I think it's Instagram as like main channels. And so just experimenting with stuff. Like I think, you know, I've grown stuff before, but I've never really done TikTok and Instagram marketing. And I just got to get out there and just try things and like learn and iterate. And like, you know, my last three videos got like 300, 400 views each. And it's like, cool, like let's post 400 more and see what happens. And it's really, I think like it is hard. Like I'm not someone who loves like taking videos of myself and putting them out there. Like I'd much rather do B2B sales. I think that's where I shine, but I got to do it. And it sucks. And you know, I'm like, I really would love to hire someone to do this for me or like, you know, to delegate it. I don't have time, but like, I just got to go get out there and just like learn and get some understanding of what I'm supposed to be doing. And I just got to, yeah, I just got to do the thing.
You know, it's funny you say that. What I found is even, I mean, take editing podcasts, right? You know, I don't necessarily think I didn't think before I started this that I would love or even really like the editing process of podcasts. But I'm forcing myself to edit the first few podcasts so that ultimately, if I do end up finding someone to help me in the editing of the podcasts, I know how I want them edited because I've done it before. And I feel like that can be applied really across any sort of task that is something that you ultimately want to delegate. If you're going to delegate it, you kind of want to know how it should be done, and then allow the person that helps you with that task take it up another level as well.
Yeah. It's like sales. Like YC, I've learned this thing, which is like, if you want to do B2B sales really well, you just got to do it. Like, it doesn't matter if you're 18, go figure it out. Because when you start hiring a BDR or an SDR and you're like a head of sales, but you don't know how to do it, how are they going to know? Right? Like, what are they, like the founder doesn't know how to sell the thing. Like, how are you going to even do it? And like, I think it also, like, early sales dictates product, right? You talk to your users through sales. You learn what they want, right? If you're out there doing marketing for consumer product and nobody cares about what you're saying, like, 300 views, if I get 1,000 views, 5,000 views for my account that have 0 followers, that's some indication that, like, hey, maybe if I had 1 million followers, people would want this, right? But like, if you're not trying, you just don't know. And then it's, you go spend money, and it's the classic startup failure where it's like, you've like scaled too soon and you don't even know anybody wants this thing.
Sure. I'm going to share another post. And this is, I think it shows your willingness to go above and beyond for your users. You've talked about users a lot. You said, I call every single user at some point and they all have my number. We get more and real feedback this way. If we get you an item you don't like and you're an SF, I drive to you to pick it up and return it for you. I'm thankful to each one of our users who shop with us. Why is this deep focus on users so important?
I think it's the only reason why we're doing this, right? Like, I'm a user, and I think that if you don't ruthlessly prioritize your users, then what are you doing? Right? That's the only way you build something really powerful, is like, people care about what you're doing. And like, we're building in a space where shopping, there's a bajillion ways to shop. There's a million apps where you can do your shopping. Like, why come to us? Right? Like, we're aiming to be the best. Like, we want to be the place that, like, the minute you think of buying something, you come to us. And the only way to do that is if we learn about your problem and we build the best product. And like, it's naive to say like, oh, I know how to build the best product without talking to anybody about it. And so like, if that means I got to go drive to go pick something up when we get something wrong, and I can learn about why we did that, then great, I'll do it. Right. And like, at this scale, we can. And like, eventually maybe I can't. And maybe I'll do it like twice or 3 times a week. Like, DoorDash, I believe their exec team still does order sometimes. And I think it just makes sense. Look at the best companies, Airbnb in the beginning days. They would go to hosts. They would ask them, hey, what's the problem here? And some people would share. I remember Brian Jeske like told us, one of the first early insights was we went to our host and we helped them take photos of their apartment. And they actually said, hey, I've been keeping notes of why all these platforms I hate. Let me share that with you. How valuable is that, right? Like, if we could do that for every user, where it's like, tell us all the reasons why you hate shopping, we would win. Like, we would just have the best insights. And so it's going above and beyond, serving your users. And like, the best companies and the best products, they're not born because the founders are like visionary of just like, I know what everybody wants and everyone's going to use my product because I'm just so amazing. No, it's because nobody cares about your product. I mean, nobody cares about you. They care about your product. Does it actually help them in their life? Right? Like, we only use everything in my life today that I buy is like, oh, it helps me in some way. Do I care? Am I like buying this because, am I buying an iPhone because Steve Jobs built it and like told me to buy an iPhone? No, it's because the iPhone is just the best phone in my opinion. And so I think it's naive to say like, we're going to build the best product without actually caring about the people using it.
Yeah, the big takeaway there is the user always has to be at the center of any decision that you make. Once you start making decisions where the user is on the fringe, that's where your company starts to go downhill, or it never gets off the ground because you're not making decisions that are focused on the user. Calvin, as we kind of wrap up the conversation here, what parting advice do you have for founders who are early in their journey and just trying to get started?
hard to say, so many things. I think if I were to boil it down, it would be like I'm right here with you. Like, I've been in this thing for 2.5 years, and like you look at my on paper stuff, but like I'm still in the very early days. Like we don't know what we're doing either, right?
Mm,
So it's staying in it, really understanding like what do you want to achieve in your life and being willing to dedicate and sacrifice a lot to do what it is and just like commit. Don't like half-ass it, right? Don't like say you want to do something extraordinary, like build a massive company, but live a normal life. That doesn't add up. Um, I think the other thing is just like, you're gonna make mistakes and it's gonna suck. Just like accept that. Just like keep going. Uh, I think that those are really my biggest learnings. And I think most people, I'd say, want to start companies and want to do this, but they say they want to, but they don't really want to.
mm,
And so don't be one of those people. If you don't want to, like if you actually in your heart don't want to do this and sacrifice, then don't.
mm.
It's okay.
Right. Well, Calvin, this has been an awesome conversation. You are a super unique founder because although you've had a lot of success, that's very clear. You're super transparent about the fact that you are also still early in your journey. So I think there's for anyone listening to this that's really looking for inspiration or motivation, you're a really great person for them to look to because you are so far in your journey, but you are also still so early in your journey. So I'm sure that our listeners are really going to be taking away a lot of insights from this conversation. Where can people find you after this conversation if they want to drop you a message or anything? And then also, if folks are interested in signing up for Fetchr, how can they do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really active on X as you see, so I see almost everything. So just drop me a DM. Always happy to kind of like answer questions or whatever. Um, I think if you want to sign up for Fetchr, just go on the website, sign up for the wait list. We're onboarding folks every week. But yeah, excited to hear from y'all.
Awesome. And then are you all just onboarding people in San Francisco, or is it for all the
It's
United
all over the
States?
U.S.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great. Awesome. Well, Calvin, thank you very much. And we will look, I'm going to certainly be following along with Fetchr and wish you all the best.
cool. Thanks.